and welcome to Experience Church. I don't know what your week was like. I had a very long week. We had a tournament this weekend in Escondido, which just seems unreasonable this time of year. So I don't know what your week or month or decade has been like, but I'm going to guess that it has some bumps in it. And I hope that this morning you could just lay those down for a minute. That no matter what you brought in here, that this is just a chance for you to breathe, to rest for the next 55 minutes, just listen to some songs, just take it in, think about what this person of Jesus could offer, and how you could get life and love and community when you need it. We're coming into our third week in our Life Cup series, and whether or not you're a soccer fan, or whether or not you care about the World Cup, which I do, I would like this to be a chance for you to think about your game plan. We're going to be talking about how the will of God, the moral will of God, can affect your life and affect your purpose. And I know those seem like big and crazy and stressful words sometimes. So I just ask that you just be open and to let the idea of this opportunity speak to you. And if it brings up questions or struggles or conflicts, please, please, please don't leave without bringing them up to one of us. We would love to talk to you about it. Pastor David will be here. I will talk to you. We would love to engage in a conversation about this. So, welcome to Experience Church.
Amen. Praise God. Right on. Yeah. Can we all have a seat? We serve a good God. And God had, I don't know about you, but there's times in my life where I ask myself, is what I'm trying to do with my life actually working? Is it actually bringing life for me? Does it help me live this life to the fullest that I think I was meant to live? And I think what's been exciting about this series is I think this series is helping me to wrestle with how do I live life to the fullest? And in a way that truly brings significance, brings meaning to my life, brings joy, and brings peace. And so David's going to come up in a minute, and just want us just to pause and think, is the pleasures I'm seeking after, are the desires I'm pursuing, are those things desires that are bringing life for me? We just want to thank for a moment just everyone who supports, who's part of our team here supporting what we're doing with Experience Church. We're grateful for what God is doing in us and through us and everything that God is building for the future through this community. And so if you are a partner with us, we just thank you. You can continue to give. There's a box in the back there, a big wooden, what are we calling it? Box in the back there that you can use. You can also give with Tithely and give online. If you have any questions about that too, ask David and myself, any of the leaders here. Before we transition to David coming up, just want to share with you an opportunity that we have next Sunday. So next Sunday, which I believe is the 22nd, 4 p.m., we're inviting everyone to come here to Morning Creeping In. And 4 to 5:30, we're going to have a prayer experience. And what this experience is about is, I don't know if you have ever actually sensed God speaking to you, sensed God moving in your life and directing you. Maybe you've had many of these moments, maybe you've never had there. You even wonder, does God really speak today? Or would he really communicate to me? So we're going to spend about an hour and a half seeking to hear from God, to listen to God, to allow God to move in us. And so, for some of us, this may be very uncomfortable. And that is perfect. That is a perfect posture to come with. To say, I'm uncomfortable, but I'm going to give this a shot and see what this is all about. For some of us, we may think, oh, I know what this is, right? And I just want to invite us all that God would stir in our community, because I don't know about you, but I need times where I just pause. There's so much clutter and so much noise. And I feel like in the midst of all that, and my phone being attached to my hip, and I have to look at it every 5 seconds, that how do I really hear from God in the midst of this? Well, we're going to take a short period of time, pause, so that we can hear from God, and develop a lifestyle of hearing from God. So we've got a bumper video coming up for you, and then David will come on forward.
Right, well, It's great to see you all today, and we're in this series called Life Cup. And the reason we wanted to play that is because some of you, when I started this, I said, we're going to do a series about football. And you're like, oh, American football? I'm like, no, football, like World Cup, come on. There's a world that, actually, there are people who care about this sport. And I know it was going to be a risk to do a series about this, but let me give you the idea behind this series. The idea is that all of these teams come to play a game, and they have a game plan in their, as they execute plays, as they, want to become champions of the World Cup. They come with a game plan, and sometimes in life, we lack our own game plan. So what we're asking throughout this series is asking this question: what is the game plan for my life? Because even if you don't know it, there's people who have a game plan for your life. Society has a game plan for your life. Maybe your boss has a game plan for your life. Maybe your parents have a game plan for your life. But we hardly stop and think, what is the game plan for my life? And we, even if, I don't know where you are in your relationship with, in terms of God or in terms of faith, but even if you don't think there's a personal God, it doesn't hurt to pause and ask this question: what is the game plan for my life? So we're wrestling with that question. And today, I want to address an issue that I think is very, very important in all of our lives. Because last week, we concluded that if you ever ask this question in terms of what is the game plan or what is God's plan in my life, that if you research in the scriptures, that you can find three major categories where God speaks about his will: the providential will of God, the moral will of God, and the personal will of God. And last week we broke that down into understanding what the three roles of this will of God, what do they mean for you and for me. And we said that the one we care the most is the personal one, right? It's the one that we say, well, I want to know what do I do with my life? I want to know, do I marry her? Do I not marry her or him? I want to know, what is my next move in my career? That it's natural for us to want to know the personal will of God. But we also said and concluded last week that as we understand the providential will of God, and as we understand the moral will of God, that the personal will of God will come out of those two things. And we said it more like in a way that out of those two we can understand the personal will of God. And today I want to hover on this idea of the moral will of God, because I think this is so unique and so important. And if you're coming back with this whole idea in terms of church, or maybe you've been in the church for a long time, I hope that today's message, it brings a different light to something that perhaps you already knew before. But this is why I want to talk about this issue, because it breaks my heart, and perhaps it breaks your heart as well. But it breaks my heart when I watch people make decisions that undermine their own potential. It breaks my heart when I see people, when they make decisions that undermine their own calling in life and purpose in life. Because there's enough pain in life, right, without making our own. But today, I want to, in part 3 of our series, I want to address this issue. And I'm going to talk about two concepts that I think some people kind of misinterpret many times. And it's this idea of our pleasure or our desires and God's moral will. We kind of view them as completely opposite for each other. We kind of say, hey, I have desires, I have a passion to something, or I have this pleasure that is completely against God's plan. And perhaps today, I hope and I pray that God brings a new light to this thing that we all wrestle with. And before I get to my main point, I want to address something and share with you something that Jesus said about this same concept. So if you have your Bibles or your Bible app, go to John chapter 10, verse 10. And if you don't have your Bibles, just follow along. The verses will be on our screens. But Jesus says something very powerful about this issue that we're talking about. In John chapter 10, verse 10, he starts by saying these words: "The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy." And when we read this in context, you'll be surprised. Because Jesus, when he's talking about this thief, He's talking about anybody or any person that steps into your life, and as a result, something is stolen, something died, or something is killed, or something is destroyed. And it can be something specific, or it can be something in general. When we think about life, anyone that steps into our life, and ultimately, as a result of that relationship, something dies, or something is killed, or something is destroyed, in the context of chapter 10 of John, Jesus would say that is a thief. Now, here's the tricky part about this verse. When we read it, we think it's an external source, don't we? But think about this, and this is maybe a downer for some of you, but think about it. Who in your life, if you're 15 years or older, who in your life has the most potential to take something away from you? Who in your life has the capacity to steal your future, kill a relationship, or destroy your life? Think about it. In terms of life, who has the potential to do that? And the answer is me. That person that we look at in the mirror. You and I have the potential many times to undermine the future of our life. You and I have influence or have the capacity to potentially become that thief. In fact, we say this all the time. We said things like, I am my own worst enemy, right? And the bad news today is that's true. You are your worst enemy. And you and I have done more in our life to undermine the potential than anyone else, or our potential. Now, as I share this with you, I'm not sharing anything new. You probably are thinking, you know what? You're right. If I can be honest, I don't know what that pleasure is for you, but you may be thinking, you know what, you're right. I bought it, or I leased it, whatever that thing is. I ate it, for some of you. I drank it. I smoked it. Some of you say, I dated it. Some of you say, I slept with it. And some, oh no, I married it. No, I don't know. I don't know what your it is. You're supposed to clap on that one. Hope your wife is not here. But don't we all have the potential sometimes to undermine our life by the decisions that we make? In some capacity, you and I are that person. But Jesus follows up with an extraordinary statement. And I believe you hear us saying this many times as a church, that we want you to experience life. And this verse that we're going to read to you today is where this value is based on. Because Jesus says this, the thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I've come that you may have life. And apparently somebody said, what do you mean by that? Because he adds onto that idea. He says, and to have it to the full. Or in other translations, they may use the word to have it more abundantly. In other words, Jesus says, I want you to have an extraordinary life. He's not talking about just having an ordinary life. I want you to have an extraordinary life. I've come that you may experience an extraordinary life. The kind of life that when people look at you, they go, wow, there's something different in you. The kind of life that, it's not because you haven't gone through a difficult time in your life. It's not because you got everything that you wanted, but it's because there's something internal that as we do life, it makes us react different to whatever comes. When we're talking about just life in general. He says, I've come so that you may have an abundant life. In other words, I've come so you may have purpose and calling and direction in life. And he continues on. He goes, I am the good shepherd. And this to you and me doesn't mean a whole lot. But the first century people are like, oh, now you're talking my language. Right? Unless you live in Ramona, you probably don't own sheep. Right? But he goes, I am the good shepherd. Not the average shepherd, because I don't come to give you an average life. I am the good shepherd. How good? The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. And I have a hard, I'm just gonna say, man. That's the type, I'm glad it's in the screens because I have a hard time saying that word. I always change CH for SH, I'm sorry. But I'm talking about that you make bad decisions, and I'm just kidding. But in this context, Jesus kind of relates to you and me as with an animal that is not pretty smart. And you'll see why as we continue on in this verse. Now this is so important, especially if you're getting back to this idea of church, because I want you to get something out of today's message. That regardless of what you read on the Old Testament, regardless of what you read in the New Testament, the context, the bottom line of this entire collection of books that we call the Bible is that God sent his Son into the world as a good shepherd. And that Jesus is that good shepherd. And that he has laid down his life for you. And whoever is willing to lay down his life for you is for you. Whoever is willing to give up his life for you, he is for you. So as we address this issue of the moral will of God, that we think there's a bunch of rules, a bunch of don'ts, the key idea is that he has already done something for you, which means that he is for you. And in contrast, you have the thief. The thief that has come to steal, kill, and destroy. And Jesus says, I've come as a good shepherd to give, to build, to protect. Now, as we address this, then we have to acknowledge that there's a decision we have to make. That when it comes to understanding the will of God, that we can follow the thief, or maybe you will be willing to say, Jesus is the good shepherd. And I'm going to follow the good shepherd because he is for me. Now, here's the thing. We have an enemy, from within. But the New Testament also talks about this other word that we don't use a whole lot in our language. And it's this word sin. And that's the second idea that I want to talk to you today. Because in the New Testament and the Old Testament, every time we talk about this word sin, it equals basically separation. There's something, whenever there's sin involved, there's something that separates. Maybe for some of you, is the relationships that you have. You've seen something come between you and that person, and you're experiencing that separation. But the New Testament, the authors of the New Testament address this word as an entity or a power that always creates separation. Separation from each other, separation from the people we say that we care the most, separation between us and God. And the reason they talk about this is because, in other words, we can say this first in using this word, that sin comes only to steal and kill and destroy. So we do have an enemy from without and an enemy from within. So consequently, and this is I think what Jesus is trying to illustrate in this. And by the way, read the whole chapter if you have a chance this week. Because the more I read it, it was amazing to see how Jesus kind of breaks down for you and for me how personal and how intimate he wants to be in this whole thing in terms of our relationship with him. But what he's addressing is that if we're not careful, if something doesn't change in our life, sin can undermine our full potential in life. So what is this whole deal about the moral will of God? What about my pleasures? And what is with this whole God's plan? Because I feel that, if I want to do God's plan, it means that I have to reject everything else that I want to do. And today, what I want to share with you is that God, who created you, he created you with the capacity to experience both. God, the Creator, gave you the capacity to experience pleasure, the capacity to enjoy His plan. I mean, let's be honest. At one point in creation, He created sex, right? And He's like, I'm about to give you something that's going to rock your world. Now, He's going to get you in a lot of trouble in the future, but it's going to be amazing. I mean, He also created wine. And to me, kind of surprises me that one of the very first miracles recorded is Jesus creating wine. And as He gets this, ministry started, I don't know if somebody was with Him and said, hey, what are we going to do first? He's like, we're going to create wine. Do you want to start there? I said, yep. But in other words, I believe that God is not against pleasure. I think the issue for a lot of us is priority. God is not against your pleasure, but He's against putting Him first. You see, and this is an issue in general. Because every time we prioritize pleasure, it becomes a problem. Think about it. When you prioritize any pleasure, generally, ultimately, you end up not enjoying it. I mean, God, I believe one can lead you to the other, but the other one will not ultimately lead you to the one. Meaning that if you put God first, He can lead you to have a life where you can enjoy and understand God's plan, purpose, and have pleasure in it. But if you put those things first, they will not lead you closer or lead you to have meaning in life. God's plan ultimately can lead you to that, but not the other way around. This is why I say that even enjoying life in general, God wants you to have an abundant life, not just an average life. But if we pursue pleasure, at the end of the day, we may not have neither. Because eventually, you know this, eventually, pleasure loses its pleasure and becomes a prison. Think about it. In the areas, and this is because of the law of diminishing return, right? You can have a half a glass one day, then a full glass, then a second, a third, a fourth, and then you may not remember what happened the night before. Over time, every single legitimate pleasure, if it becomes our priority, if it becomes our master, pleasure loses its pleasure. And what began as a pastime turns into a pathway. And what turns into a pathway turns into a habit. And perhaps an addiction. And all of a sudden, it becomes your prison. Now, the Apostle Paul addresses this in a unique way. He's speaking to a group of believers in the book of Romans. And he's writing this about 30 to 40 years after Jesus. And he addresses this same issue. And again, he's not telling us anything new that we don't know. But perhaps he says it in a way that is easier to understand. And he says this in Romans 6, verse 16. Don't you know that when you offer yourself to someone or something as obedient slaves, you are slaves at the one you obey? Now pause. I want you to listen to that verse again, and don't think about this to be a religious book. Don't think about theology. Just think about common sense. Let's read it together again. Don't you know that when you offer yourself, basically when you say yes to this, I'll take that. Yes, I'll call her. Coming over. Yes. Whenever we say yes to something or someone, as obedient slaves, you are slaves of the one you obey. In other words, if we continue saying yes to the same pleasure over and over and over, Paul says, don't you realize that you become slaves to that pleasure? And you and I say, no, but I'm choosing that. And Paul will say, that's exactly my point. Don't you realize if you choose over and over the same thing, you're not longer choosing. You've now been drawn in. You are giving up control. You're behaving as a slave. You're behaving as if you have to, not that you want to. And he goes on. Whether you are a slave to sin, which leads to death, and this is why I give you the definition of sin in terms of separation. Because something that is separated, or something that is apart, when you think about something organic, is dying. And this for you, maybe you may be able to see it happening in a relationship. When all of a sudden you see separation, and you feel that relationship is dying. That whether you are slave to sin, which leads to death, or to obedience, which leads to righteousness, and righteousness is just a fancy New Testament word that means to be at the right standing with God. And Paul says, don't you realize that every time we say this in life, when you're becoming obedient to sin, don't you realize that you have the same opportunity to become obedient to your Creator? That you can either lean towards one or you can lean towards the other. And I think Paul in this is just saying, don't you realize that God, more than wanting you to stop something, wants you to lean in and make Him first in your life. And for us, by the way, when I say this, prioritizing God, it doesn't mean coming to Sunday. For us, it doesn't mean that you have to put money on the offering plate. For us, it's about an experience. It's about a life. It's about a journey. For us, it's about when hard times come, that you have people around you that can walk with you. This is, I believe, what he means in terms of having purpose in life. And I gotta be honest, I get myself in trouble when I think of, hey, I need something to either fix myself up or pick myself up, or something to fix me. But ultimately, those decisions making those decisions will undermine my full potential. And Jesus says, I've come. I have great plans for your life. And I have great plans because I am a good shepherd. And I'm here because I've given my life for you. So this is what we've been saying in this series. That as we seek after understanding God's will in our life, that He, as our Creator and as the best communicator, has a plan for your life. So I want to ask you 2 questions as I wrap up today. I want to ask you these questions, and I'm not going to trick you at the end of this. I'm not going to say, if you say yes to this question, raise your hand. Now stand up, now come forward. I won't do that to you. We're adults. But I do want you to think about this. I do want you to hopefully talk to someone. Again, we're here for you. You can talk to me, you can talk to Diana, Tim, or somebody, maybe the person who invited you. But I want to ask you this question. Is there any pleasure that's undermining your purpose? Because remember, only the thief will come to steal something from you. And only the thief who wants to mess up the plan, your game plan, your future dreams. And this pleasure most likely is going to look like something maybe your kids are seeing in you. And they say, Mom or Dad, how come you always, you can fill in the blank. Or maybe your spouse say, hey, I feel like we cannot talk about this. That is that issue, that desire, that pleasure in your life. And if I wasn't clear, let me ask you that in a different way. Is there a pleasure that is slowly undermining your full potential? Now, not all pleasure is bad, illegal. For some of you, you may be having an illegal pleasure. I don't know. But is this idea of prioritizing and leaning in trusting and putting our faith that Jesus is the good shepherd. And that this moral will, it serves us more like as a compass for you and me. That this moral will is being given already because He is for you. He's not against you. And I want us to wrestle with this before I move on. I was tempted to just skip this one because I knew it was going to be very quiet. But if I can be very honest, I don't want us to get to the end of our life and feel like we couldn't hear direction from God. And we may ask at that time, what happened? And when you ask that question, you will discover the thing we're discovering together today. That you are the worst enemy. That you are a sheep who needs a shepherd. A shepherd that is found in Jesus. And perhaps today, by the grace of God, you'll be willing to trade your pleasure for a relationship. And we're not saying that all of us, here don't sin anymore. But we're saying that for us, there was a point in time where we made a decision of trading that and seeing Jesus as our only shepherd, because we were convinced that He was for us. Let's pray together. God, this is so heavy, and I know it's so easy. It's easier for me to talk about it and just walk out of here than for internalize this message. I know for many of us, we struggle with many, many, many things. Maybe people here don't know where to start. But would you give us the courage, Lord, to talk about this with someone? Will you give us the faith to trust you? I pray that in this moment, people will experience a breakthrough in their knowledge of you, and most importantly, in the way of just doing life. And that they will say yes to you. They will say yes to the Good Shepherd. And that they will surrender their lives.